I'm delighted to be speaking this morning to this big event. It's actually a very big event. It's an international event, as Laban has outrightly said. And well done, Nancy, and everybody who made this a success. As you've heard, I work with the British High Commission as the country director for the UK Kenya Tech Hub. And how I connected with Nancy and Jasiri, it was quite interesting. This year in June, we went to the UK for the London Tech Week. We were excited because it was the first time it was happening since 4 years of existence of the UK Kenya Tech Hub. And there's one part of our objective that seemed to be not tackled well, and that is linking Kenya and the UK. That objective has always been elusive in terms of both how do we execute, how do we create programs around that. So when we went for the London Tech Week, I took a notebook and a pen to go and learn because we have two more tech hubs in Africa. We have the Nigeria Tech Hub and the South African Tech Hub. And in meetings, they were talking about we are taking startups to London. And we were just, oh, so that's possible. We were wondering how possible that was. And so I really needed to learn from what they did and how they did to make it happen. So I did not draft any program, but the program was, we used the Nigeria Tech Hub program. And this was the amazing part. We didn't take any startups, but Nigeria was struggling with how many to lock out because they were taking about 30 startups and they had paid for themselves. And we were like, wow, something is happening here that we need to learn. And when we went there, the program was drafted by the Nigeria Tech Hub. And we were in meeting after meeting, workshop after workshop, and all by Nigerian professionals who are in banking, who are in investment, who are in BDS, and all those services that are required to help them get into that market. And they were in a community. It was the first time I ate jollof rice. It was quite interesting. And I said, when I go back home, I have to find out who is doing what. And I probed my good friends in London and said, I want to know who is a Kenyan and who is doing what. I want to map. I want to be there and I want to support. I want to create programs that can support that. And so someone just told me, have you heard of Jasiri? Just check them on Instagram. Went on Instagram, saw what they were doing. I had to send a message on Instagram, and Nancy responded. And this is how I ended up here this morning to speak to all of you. So that's the London Tech Week story. Yesterday, Nikolai shared a very inspiring story, and I asked two questions. And one of the questions was, how did you get to seed? How did you get from seed to Series A? Because it seemed to be the very, very difficult place to be. Like literally you're running out of money, you're trying to sell all your assets, and no one is buying into your story, and you're just like, I'm gonna die. And I've had so many endless stories like that. And he told me, he said yesterday, most of you who were there had, how many? He said 80 pitches He had to talk to 80 investors. They did what they decided. They actually decided to go to the Silicon Valley. And that, to me, is something, and remember what he said was the biggest challenge. I know most of you said it was risk, but he said they just didn't understand the African market. So it is actually a challenge to us to see how can we communicate better that the African market is made up of how many countries? 54 countries. And they're not that integrated. But there's a lot of conversation on how to do cross-border business. And I think we've been actively trying to see how we can put resources in opening up markets. And I mentioned yesterday. The other thing that I was inspired about this is that the first time I met Nancy physically was in another event called the Silicon Exchange with some very good friends of mine, Carla and Ashley. And of course, this is the silicon-facing side of things. But it's equally important because there is something that also is a challenging component to getting companies from seed to Series A, or from 100 to 1,000, and that is co-founding, or people who have the skills and ability to build ventures that could scale, okay? You've heard of the story of the first unicorn and how the co-founding made it possible. This guy who worked in the Silicon Valley that Aboyeji went to look for. That is a diaspora sort of capability. That's what you can deliver. So he went, this guy had worked with JP Morgan. He had 3 patents. 3 patents. Where not any other university, from MIT, he's Nigerian. He became the success story of Flutterwave. Okay? So it's a challenge for us to see how do we map out this and grow those companies that could actually scale in this market, because we need that talent. This morning, we were having a very interesting discussion with my good friend Martin and Nashon. And there was the challenge of context, of really understanding what is the problem here, because I know sometimes we want to bring London to Africa or bring London to Nairobi, and the chaos and the reality just makes you feel like, wow, this is too much work. But perhaps we need not to be that smart, but shift our perspective in really understanding what potentially could work and how you can plug in and make it work using the kind of knowledge, the kind of expertise you have. The other aspect, which is quite interesting, is that we did a very interesting program before I got to the UK Tech Hub. There's a program that was run called AAA, that is Africa Angel Academy, by a partner called Viridian in South Africa. That program became successful, not so successful, but the success that came out of that was NIBAN. How many of you have heard of NIBAN? NIBAN is Nairobi Business Angel Network. And 2nd of December, we were launching the El Doban. And this is based on athletes. So we did something called Tech Run, which was, of course, first of a kind, and it was extremely successful. But we saw how much these people are willing to invest in their own sports using tech. And so it was so fascinating that why Naiban was successful was because of the founder called Nick. Because most of these groupings, people are busy. They are professionals in whatever they are, and they do have a day job. And to get things done requires someone like Nick. So that program transformed to actually what we call Angel Leader Program. So we target Nicks. And I think this is also throwing out there for you. If you feel you're a Nick and you want to be part of that program, because I think diaspora has to be organized in sort of the biggest angel. And I know we have that. We have some of those. We just need to map out. So the biggest angels, I think, should be diaspora, and you should be going just, of course, beyond the land, plot, and houses to understanding how do we create scale-ups. Because there's a lot in that space. So the last thing that I want to talk about, I've talked about linking diaspora to angel investing group and seeing how that works. But the last thing I want to talk about is, so looking at all these things, the UK Tech Hub felt that much as we have 4 work streams. One is access to finance, access to markets, and access to talent. The 4th one is community engagement. And because of a lot of interaction with people like you, we felt like there needs to be a program or something owned by you guys that could help. Because we have a UK sort of mandate and that could really help us interacting better and growing this network. And so we started something called 360 Connect, which essentially connects all the 3 work streams together and tries to work with organizations like Jasiri, like Nala, and startups that are doing cross-border or diaspora solution, and see how best can we unlock this space. And I think we had very successful conversation, even with other partners. I don't know how many of you know Kenya National Innovation Agency. How many? So I'm just giving you what is in Kenya, especially for those of you who are coming from London. So the Kenya is the government-mandated agency to deal with innovation and startups. So we had a conversation, and immediately after the Silicon Exchange, we came up with something called Kenya Global Initiative Agenda. And I think that, of course, is something that right now has just started, but it's bound to grow big. And that linking with Jasiri, Silicon Exchange, the French, and you've talked about German, and bringing all this conversation of this innovation space has to be tackled in a community way. And giving examples of the valleys that have been successful, the Silicon Valley, one of the things that they did right was to make sure it's a community. A porous boundary with a thesis of give before you get, not what is in it for me, which you've had for a very long time. What is in it for me? So I think for the first time, I am one person who's very excited because more than before, we have efforts to collaborate. We have efforts to exchange ideas. And I think the future looks very promising just because of that, because we are breaking silos and getting things to be done. So back, as I conclude, to my journey through the London Tech Week, quite a number of things we learned. It was the first time I knew that the UK offered 2 visas. I wasn't aware of them, having worked with the UK for some time. One visa is the Global Entrepreneurs Visa. The other one is the Innovators Visa. And I was asking myself, why? I sit in the office, and this is through a program called GEP, which is Global Entrepreneurship Program. Under the Department of Business and Trade. Then I realized that the Department of Business and Trade in Nairobi focuses on the traditional business. Okay? So that's tea, flower farms, get what I mean? And facilitate them to get to London or to get to England. Now, when I was in London, there's a lady who texted me and said, hey, I'm in London. I've been in London for about 3 months. And I said, wow, that sounds exciting. Well, how did you get there? She's told me, I came through the Global Entrepreneurship Visa. I was like, how? Said, I went through the South African office. And I actually now realized that the GEP program has sort of missed the opportunity in Kenya simply because of thinking South Africa is Africa, especially for startups. Okay? So I am inspired to really get the Kenyans know the opportunities that are there to help you settle and to help you do business in the UK. And that is a resource that is given to us, but we do not know how to go about it. And so part of what we are trying to do is also activate Global Entrepreneurship Program here in Kenya because it was majorly based in South Africa. We didn't know about it. We didn't know about the visa. 2 days ago, there's a gentleman who has been probing me and saying, I incorporated my company in London, but even just opening a bank account has been hell. I want to close and go to Delaware. I said, fair enough. We need to know what is happening, okay? There are resources that from our end, we are trying to see how we can uncover so that it can help all of you to actually have that cross-border or cross-city, cross-ecosystem conversation, collaboration, and trade happen better. So with that, I will end there and say thank you very much for listening to me, and I wish you a very successful summit ahead.